PodSAS, where we're putting the sass back in sassy. Sponsored by LeadrPro, where you can book demos with target customers on demand and fill your sales pipeline instantly.
Welcome everybody to another episode of PodSAS. Today we have Sam Jacobs from Pavilion, formerly known as Revenue Collective. Thanks so much for joining us, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And you're based are you based on the East Coast?
Yeah, New York City.
Awesome. Great. And you're in a unique situation where I'll let you kind of speak about it, but what is Pavilion, and who is the target community for what you've built?
Pavilion is a paid membership community for high growth leaders and their teams. And when we say high growth leaders, we really mean anybody with the aspiration to become a leader with motivation and ambition. And what we do is we provide really community powered products and services to help people get where they want to go in their career. We call it helping them unlock and achieve their professional potential. And that means training, that means peer-to-peer learning, that means 24 hours a day, question and answer so that people can get questions to difficult challenges. It means mentoring. The North Star for us is always, what do people need in their careers in order to be successful and effective? And that's what we've been building for a number of years now.
Awesome. And it's been, you guys have had it since 7, 8 years ago, right? Since you guys started.
Yeah, I started bringing people together in New York in about 2014.
Okay.
Dinners. I was a sales leader at the time, so a go-to-market leader. And my background in training is primarily in sales and go-to-market. So I started bringing people together in that context. We called it Revenue Collective. It was really for VPs of sales, VPs of marketing, VPs of customer success to convene, to talk about what their challenges were, what they were working on, what their obstacles were, and also to help give perspective and insight and elevation around their career potential.
Very useful information, I could imagine. In terms of I think the idea of building community, and then having peer-to-peer thought leadership, to have that ability to kind of I think sometimes a lot of people operate in silos to a certain degree. Even though you're within a company, there is a hierarchy structure, and you don't know kind of what the best practices are, or even what to look for, even ask for when you're switching around to different companies, or even when you get promoted, and those types of scenarios. So I can see how that kind of community can really leverage each other in terms of people have been there before, or people are going at different positions or working into a new vertical, and then understanding kind of what to ask for, and it's part of that communication process.
You're exactly right, and not only that, but the jobs themselves change so much.
Yeah.
In the modern world, there's no common. We think there's a common definition for what a chief marketing officer is supposed to do and what their responsibilities are and how they're supposed to execute those things. But the reality is that there isn't. It changes by the week, by the day. And so all the company knows, all an individual company knows is mostly they know about their product, but they don't know as much collectively about about the function. And that's where peer-to-peer groups, peer-based groups of people that are doing something similar to what you're doing, asking them questions and helping get answers and providing answers back to those people can be incredibly valuable.
I'm excited to kind of dive into that and the evolution of the CMO role or the chief revenue officer role, because it's drastically changed. I feel like it's become more of a hybrid between sales and marketing nowadays, especially with the idea of growth. And when you're talking about startups and kind of those growth stages, it's a lot different. There's a lot more. There's, I think, a lot more coverage in terms of what a sales executive or a marketing executive covers nowadays. And there's a lot more bridge over between those two departments. It's not just, it's not like how it used to be in terms of single departments operating to a certain degree and then handing over to the other department anymore.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And specifically as it relates to sales marketing, I think there is, which is a good thing. I think there's growing education and awareness on how it all works together, and that's why we have these concepts like revenue operations, which is in opposition to sales operations or marketing operations or revenue intelligence. It's because people, I think, increasingly understand that all of our departments, making money as a team sport, keeping that money is a team sport. There's not just one department that's responsible for making all the money, because it all has to work together effectively in order to grow a business.
Before we dive into that, and I think I watched an interview also where you had spoken about that you had started a record label at one point as well. So I'm curious as to what that journey looked like, kind of early on in your career path. But yeah, if you're ready, we like to do a series of just rapid fire questions, get to know you as a person, and nothing too crazy, but again, just pretty lighthearted questions here. if you're ready
Sure,
for
I'm
it.
happy to provide any. I can tell you about the record label. I can answer rapid fire questions, whatever you want from me.
Cool, let's do it. Um, we'll start things really easy. Just favorite entrepreneur and or like a startup story for you.
I need to think about something that's not totally cliche. One of my favorite entrepreneurs is Alexander Saint Amand. So
Okay.
he was one of the early employees at Gerson Lehmer Group, where I worked for a number of years.
Okay.
And he was I think the second CEO after Mark Gerson. The company's named after Mark Gerson and Thomas Lehrman, but Alexander is really the person that helped take that company. I joined, they were about 25 million in recurring revenue, and when I left 7.5 years later, they were 300 million. And he is only a couple years, I'm in my 40s, he's only a couple years older than me, and I think he's only worked two places, Bloomberg. Well, now he's worked three because he started a new company. But I just love that journey because, for me, when I think about what makes entrepreneurs successful, it's obsession and love of their customers. And I really feel like Alexander and Mark and Thomas all were really attuned to their customers, which were, primarily investment firms here in New York originally. Then, of course, they expanded all over the world. But I really feel like one of the keys to their success was just an obsession about understanding and empathizing with their customers. So I'll say Alexander Saint Amand.
Going back to kind of when you were like in that 8, 9, 10-year-old phase, do you remember what you wanted to be as a kid?
Yeah, I wanted to be an astronaut.
I think I had that too. That's not a super common answer, but some that I've heard probably at least a handful of times now that we've done
I
like
wanted
these
two things. I
interviews.
wanted to be, my mom always says that when I was a very young kid, I always said I want to be rich when I grow up. So I wanted to be an astronaut and I wanted to be rich. I think I'm pursuing the latter course more forcefully than I'm pursuing the former course.
But nowadays, I mean, it's totally possible to be an astronaut too. So like if you can get the latter, you can definitely do the former.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Here's a question: most painful experience, and to provide some context to that, I feel like a lot of personal growth, professional growth, typically comes from something like very uncomfortable, where maybe in the moment you didn't really realize it, but in hindsight, those are kind of like those pivotal moments that change the trajectory of a career, of a path in life, or what have you. Any kind of moment that you can reflect on that you think has led you to where you are
Yeah,
now?
of course. I mean, I've had lots of painful moments. That's sort of the impetus behind founding the company in the first place. And
Hmm.
one, not, there was a point in 2017 that I remember, but I'll say that the most painful moment was being fired in 2015 from a company that I'd worked at for 4.5 years, where I should have seen it coming, but I didn't see it coming. And it was one of those situations where you go for a walk with the CEO, and while you're on the walk, they're locking you out of all of the computer systems
Oh wow.
and making it so that you can't go back to the office. Someone will message you your things. And I remember, in fact, we're doing this call on a Zoom on a laptop that I bought in 2015 after leaving that company, because I remember the act of giving back my laptop to the head of HR who met me at the Grey Dog Cafe here in Manhattan. And I just remember the feeling of, humiliation, to be honest, of like
Yeah.
having to give back the computer that I used and wondering if I'd, I don't know, downloaded something that was personal or just in any way, just feeling that sense of violation. So I resolved that going forward, I was never going to let the company buy me a computer. I was always going to use my own computer. And this is the same computer that I purchased. Again, it's coming up on 7 years old, which is pretty crazy for a laptop.
That is crazy. But I mean, that's a great story. And I mean, super, super vulnerable to actually share something like that. I think that's like, that's amazing in terms of like just sharing that story. And I'm sure like you've seen a lot of accelerated growth in that kind of like 7-year period since then. And yeah, I can relate to some of those things where you have those impetus moments that really just change the trajectory of everything. And there's something to be spoken where it's kind of like it could be something humiliating or something where it's like you feeling like you're trapped into a corner, you have to box your way out. But in those moments, I feel like something gets unlocked where it's like you don't. There's a certain sense of you have nothing to lose, kind of like pushing you to think a lot more creatively about opportunities and the possibilities of what you actually want to do, versus like maybe going down another safe path of just something that it feels like a little bit more organic than that, or not as like a dramatic.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I certainly wholeheartedly agree that I'm writing a book, and in one of the parts of the book, and I've written about this in other places too, is that part of this whole thing is like redefining failure and viewing it in a broader context. It's not failure; it's just experiences, and you can learn from those experiences if you choose to.
Sure.
I wish that was like the low point. That was, you asked, like painful. That was the most painful. I was
Mm.
actually fired two more times after that, and I had three more jobs before I began working for myself post that point in 2015, but they weren't ever quite as traumatizing. That was a pretty traumatic moment. And then the point at which I resolved never again was actually in 2017, when I was fired for the second to last time. And that was when I said, you know what, I cannot continue to have my entire livelihood be in somebody else's hands. I need to do
Yeah.
something, whether it's build a side gig or side hustle, but I need other ways of making money and of supporting myself that don't completely rely on somebody else in a whim or in a moment deciding, you know what, he's not a good fit anymore, goodbye. So that's where, 2017 was really the moment that I started building what is now Pavilion.
Given that you're, building this now, 2017, having gone through these series of, getting let go and somewhat traumatic experiences, what's kind of, motivated you to push forward? And, like, as you it could have taken it very, very personally, right? You could have gone back and tried again and again and again. Probably, it would have weighed a lot more on you, but you found maybe some kind of like frustration or some kind of inkling that you just like decided I need to do something else. What was motivating you to do that something else? Was it just like that idea of somebody else having too much control over the outcome of your life, or was there anything else?
Yes, it was fundamentally that. It was a sense that, and I've talked about this before, but it was just a sense that I did not have control, and that if I really thought as highly, like if I felt the same, like if I've always felt like there was great potential within me, and I got to the point where if I was going to realize the potential, I needed to start taking it into my own hands and really
Mhm.
like modifying my approach. Instead of trying to be part of somebody else's designs, I needed to sort of create my own designs. So that was, and also, yeah, I mean, there was no way. Well, I don't know. Once I started doing that, I would say that, people say like starting your own job, starting your own company is like an incredibly risky decision. And what I've felt for a long, especially because I've been doing this now on my own for 3.5 years, I really realized that like walking into work in an atmosphere where you're not sure what your job security is, that was far riskier, far scarier to me than working for myself. And one of the things but it's just a leap of faith. That's part of the whole thing, is must be a leap of faith, in the sense that like if it was guaranteed that you would be successful, then it wouldn't be an opportunity in the first place. Somebody else would be there, somebody else would have done it. So you actually have to make that leap. And that's a very scary thing to do, to jump, especially when you don't, I don't have family money. I don't have a trust fund. I wasn't particularly good with money, you know, beforehand. So it's not like I saved up everything and everything went to shit. I could live for 2 years and it wouldn't matter. Like I needed to survive, especially because, as I mentioned, I'm in New York City. So it was pretty scary, but also an incredibly exhilarating moment to take a leap and understand that, okay, you're going to have to figure it out. And instead of lending other people, really selling other people your best ideas, which is what, when you're an employee, you give your best ideas to your employer, and that's what's in exchange for compensation.
Yeah.
And what's possible when, instead of giving them to somebody else, you give them to yourself. And it turned out that a great deal was possible.
Yeah. No, I can relate to that for sure. Um, in the past like 3.5 years, you said you've been operating this by yourself now. It's become more of a your own full-time job now, and you're managing this huge community. What's kind of been your favorite war story from that experience of like, because starting anything from scratch, right? Like it is, even though you're betting on yourself and you're explaining now, it feels less risky, but it's like you're still having to build and build and grind a little bit to get to that stage of like, hey, this is gonna grow and sustain itself. Before you get to that moment of clarity, what was some of those roller coaster moments that you had gone through?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot, and I say I'm working on it myself. We've got 70 full-time employees, so it's definitely
Yeah.
not just me. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but I guess here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing is that you want to be one of those people, and Justin Welsh, on LinkedIn, he's one of those people. He says, my whole secret to success is lowering my ambition and becoming comfortable with more modest goals. And I started off doing this with more modest goals. But the
Hmm.
interesting thing is that um, you know the more success you achieve, the more you want more success, right? Because what seemed so at first, when I first started this thing, I said, if I can get, had about a couple hundred when I quit my job or left my last full-time job, which was December of 2018. And I said, if I can get this thing to 2,000 people by the end of 2020, which was 2 years from then, that'll be enough to support me. That'll be enough. That's all I really want. And uh, we were at 3,700 members at the end of 2020, and we closed a $25 million financing in April of 2021, about a year ago. And now the idea that and so we're at, as I mentioned, right, 7,800 members. My greatest aspiration was 5,000. My greatest aspiration, right? And now we're well past that. So you would think, okay, Sam, you must feel pretty good every day. You must be patting yourself on the back. And the answer is no, I don't, because once you get to one level, you don't want to be the person that just got to that level. You want to make it to the next level and to the next level. And so now I want to, now there seems to be a really big opportunity, and I want to
Hmm.
make sure that I take advantage of it.
Hmm.
And so even though there's been tremendous success by any objective measure, I'm still living in what have you done for me lately from a business perspective, in
Hmm.
terms of looking at our customers who are members, who are professionals, and figuring out, does this thing suck? Is it good? Do they value it? I want to make sure. My greatest fear is that one day it sucks, and frankly, we're at a size and scale right now where there are people that say that it sucks.
Hmm.
And that's why, I would love to tell you that everything's great and there were some early hiccups at the beginning, but now I'm
Yeah.
Mr. Zen and everything's perfect. I'm much more positive than I was before, and I'm much happier, but I'm also still very sensitive to, I want to make sure that we continue to reinvent ourselves so that
Hmm.
this thing is good. It's good for the 7,801st person. It's good for the 25,000th person, and it's good for the 100,000th person. So there hasn't been a moment when I'm like, you know what, that's good. I'm going to hang up my cleats. I made it
Yeah.
through that part.
In those early days, right? I'm sure you wore a ton of hats, even though you had sales background and you seem pretty adaptable. But has there been any skill that you've picked up along the way that you either loved or hated while wearing, multiple hats?
I don't know if I hate it or love it, but I am glad that we have a head of finance now, because
Yeah.
I didn't love uh, doing that so much. I do love working in numbers, and I
Yeah.
do love understanding how the financial statements of the business relate to the performance of the business. But there's a lot of accounting work that I don't particularly enjoy, that
Yeah.
I have to first develop and then offload to somebody else. I will say that you know um, people sometimes take this, I don't know how they take it, but I mean it sincerely, for better or for worse, which is that I guess inside I think I'm pretty self-disciplined, but I'm also lazy. If I just had my own way, and we didn't have bodies, so you couldn't see if I was gaining weight or unhealthy or whatever, I'd probably be a pretty lazy, slothy person. But what that means is that I'm a pretty good delegator, because there's a lot of work that I just don't want to do. And I think delegation is actually a pretty important skill as you
Hmm.
grow and as you become a leader. And the people that have trouble delegating, the people that feel like they need to do everything themselves, those are the people that I think max out earlier in their
Yeah.
evolution as executives, and particularly as CEOs. And for better or for worse, I'm very comfortable delegating. I'm very comfortable saying, you go do this and you go do that and come back to me when it's done. And again, I think that there's good stuff behind that and there's bad stuff behind it, but that's a skill that I've always known I was going to be pretty good at as we got to this point.
That said, how valuable do you consider emotional intelligence as part of like a hiring process or in the idea of building community?
Well, I think emotional intelligence is incredibly important. The thing, sometimes people say, well, what do you attribute the success to? Because there were other communities, there are
Yeah.
lots of them, and there still are. So what is it that's different? For me, it depends if this is part of emotional intelligence, but for me, the most important thing, and I don't know why, is authenticity. My greatest fear, pardon my French, is being full of shit.
Mhm.
The greatest compliment I aspire to is I want someone to say about me, he's the least full of shit person in Manhattan. So I don't know if anybody does say that about me, but I aspire to be having that said about me. And I think that authenticity really resonates with people. And that's part of what draws people to our community, which
Mhm.
is that we answer questions in a direct way. Like our purpose, the tone of our conversations are direct and helpful. Right. My greatest fear when I say this thing sucks and I talk about, Pavilion as a community, what I'm afraid of is that there's so much BS that's happening that you can't get to real value. You can't get
Mm.
an actual insight. And so I'm always trying to push myself to be as direct and real and transparent as possible, because I think that that's the thing that creates engagement. People, everybody's going through a difficult life. Nobody wants to hear that everything was easy and everything was perfect. And the
Yeah.
more you can be honest about what it took to get you to where you are, I think the more people engage with it.
That's kind of the goal of what we're trying to accomplish here too, is just tell those authentic narratives, because I do think people are more connect to those type of experience, and we've all been there. And to just sugarcoat that experience is like short selling. I feel like the uh, what your actual journey looked like to those that are responding to it.
Yeah, and it also makes people, those people that are going through these experiences, feel more alone because they
Yeah,
feel like, well, maybe this isn't normal. Maybe it's not normal to get fired. I'm like, well,
yeah,
I've been fired lots. you know,
yeah,
from where I sit, it's perfectly normal.
yeah. Fair enough. Um, in some of these high stress moments, obviously now with raising 25 million and having a series of investors and board, I don't know if you have a board to go answer back to, but obviously now having those responsibilities, anything that you do to decompress personally that you go to, activity wise, or
I have a whole series of spreadsheets
mm,
on that are about holding myself accountable.
mm,
So every day I have a good day spreadsheet, and there's I think 5 or 6 things in it. And if I do 5 of the 6, there's conditional formatting in the spreadsheet that changes it from bad to good.
yeah,
So on the good, what's a good day for me? If I write in my journal, because that helps me decompress and just put my thoughts down on paper. If I read a book, and I've moved away from Kindle, so like it's actually reading a real book. If I exercise, if I meditate, if I drink water, and if I find one other person to do something good for without asking anything in return, then that would constitute a good day. And so I just try to do that every single day. So, I've already worked out today, but I haven't read yet and I haven't journaled. I have meditated. So, it's just that's a checklist to keep me balanced so that when I go crazy, because I do go crazy, I can go back to like, hey, just stick to the program. You'll feel less crazy in 12 hours. Maybe you need to go for a run.
yeah, yeah. I feel that too. Um, last question here before we kind of just dive into like your journey to getting to Pavilion, but uh, legacy, the idea of legacy, and kind of like, what do you want to leave behind, or the impact that you want to leave behind in this world?
Well, to the point of, authenticity, I want to, the legacy I want to leave behind is I want to challenge the idea that you have to be a ruthless bastard in order to be successful.
Mhm.
And I want to teach people that helping other people is not just a thing that you do to feel good about yourself, but that it is actually a path to personal success. And that the more people you help, and a lot of times people come to me and they say, I want to build my brand. What should I do to build my brand? How should I begin networking? And I say, why don't you go find a couple of people to help and just help them find a job, help
Mm.
them be better at their job, send them a thing, and don't ask for anything in return. Make it a point of pride that you don't need anything from them. You're not doing it to keep score. You're doing it to help.
Yeah.
And I have found personal success. Yes, I have a business around it, but I was doing this. I go well above and beyond, I think, what people would assume goes into their membership dues. And much of my days every week are spent talking to individual members in career coaching sessions. And I do that because I want to show people that like there's a different way to do business, that you can be focused on relationships, you can be focused on long term, that you don't need to be transactional, that it's okay to leave some money on the table sometimes. You don't need to extract every last ounce of value from every negotiation. And that if you believe in the long term, if you believe in karma, if you believe in doing good and not chiseling people and not being small and making introductions for people, if you believe in all those things, that you can personally be rewarded. That's the legacy I want to leave.
Great. That's a great legacy to leave behind, for sure. So you touched upon a lot of awesome topics, but I think like let's just dive into your background with sales, specifically as it relates to startups. From some of the stuff that I've seen in terms of other interviews and stuff, it seems like you've been working pretty heavily in the sales capacity since like 2003, helping companies scale and grow. Um, you want to speak a little bit about how you found your way into sales in the first place, let alone starting this huge, community now, but like leading up to that point.
Sure. I mean, so 2003 is when I joined Gerson Lammer Group. That was the company
Yep.
that Alexander was the CEO of. I wasn't in sales actually then. I was in
Okay.
research management. Well, what does research management mean? Well, it doesn't have a meaning outside of GLG, to be completely honest. But what it is client service. But it's client service. We all had a commercial orientation at GLG. And so I was in lots of meetings. I was running a team very quickly and ultimately got promoted to be the head of research management, which again, outside the company, nobody knew what that meant. Nobody knows what it means today. What it means is I was the VP of customer success. That's what
Okay.
my job was from 2003 to 2010. But I had a highly commercial focus, even though I wasn't explicitly compensated on sales. So I left GLG in 2010 and I joined this company called Axial. And that's when I realized that like I hadn't really been trained
Mm,
in, all of the core foundational disciplines. And so but I said, you know what, if you're at a software company, you're either building it or you're selling it, some variation of that.
yep.
And I don't know how to write code and I'm not a product manager. So I'm not going to be on the product and engineering side. Therefore, even though nobody knows what research management was, everybody knows what sales is. I think I just need to become the VP of sales.
Mhm.
And so I began my journey to explicitly focus on and refashioning myself as a sales leader. And that was what I did. And so, from 2010 to 2018, I now called myself a sales leader, which I was. I mean, I wasn't just calling myself that, I was that. But it was more reflecting on the 7 years prior, also thinking, I may not have carried a bag as an account executive in that job, but I was making sales. I was keeping spreadsheets of what the run rate of the business was and helping drive value creation in client meetings. So, that ties into my evolution. But fundamentally, the reason that I found my way into sales was because I feel like if I didn't know how to build it, I better know how to sell it.
Mm, fair enough. And so I also overheard, and I'm curious about like the idea of the record label. When did that insert itself in this journey of become a sales leader?
That was prior to. So when
Prior
I
to.
was in,
Okay.
I graduated from University of Virginia in
Okay.
1999,
I see.
and I was a finance major. So I was going to be in investment banking, and I did banking for a year while I also started a record label. And I
Nice.
was, a young kid and thought, I just wanted to be special, to the point of like feeling like I had this potential inside of me. And I love music. And I had a bunch of friends that were in bands. And I felt like, you know what, if and same thing, right? Like the thing of like, if I don't know how to write music. I'm not a songwriter. So what I'll do is I will put a record label together. I'll be the business person behind these bands. And so that was the idea. I moved back to Charlottesville. I did it all wrong. I didn't make connections. I didn't have a network. I didn't have any experience. And I call it exercises in poverty and humility because I was so dirt broke. We used to have this thing where one of the guys that I lived with at this farm that we were living in making music, he used to work at Bodo's Bagels in Charlottesville. And we would say that we would have bagel salad sandwiches for dinner, which is a bagel with a bagel in the middle, because we couldn't afford anything else. So, the end of that story is that it wrapped up the record label. It wasn't successful because it's a terrible business, and I wasn't that great at picking bands. But I moved back to New York in 2003, and I bought an acoustic guitar, and I started writing songs and making music. And I feel reasonably confident in saying that the music that I ended up, it's all on Spotify at this point, was better than the music that I supported during the record label. So once again, this idea that like sometimes you don't give yourself permission, I didn't give myself permission to be CEO for a long time.
Mhm.
And part of it is just saying, no, 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 you're a CEO, you know what you're doing. Time to demonstrate that. Same thing with writing songs.
So you proved it out earlier on the music side, and then it came later on the professional side for whatever reason. But that's awesome. Um, so from let's kind of like fast forward you going through that sales experience for 8 years and being a sales leader, and then getting let go a couple of times, where I don't think that's a very uncommon story, especially when it comes to sales. And I think, like, especially when you're working with startups, I mean, yeah, it is either you're building it or you're selling it. The issue is sometimes, majority of the times, it has to go hand in hand. There's the idea of product market fit, where, like, I just spoke to another CEO of a tech company that now closed a Series B round, but like he became the CEO only and after like he had gone through like this demoted experience of going from a VP of sales to becoming like just a sales hire. And then the CEO haphazardly left when he transitioned to a new company, and he was like the only person really there to kind of like take over this building that was essentially set on fire, and he had to put out the flames and then rebuild the whole thing. But they had poor product market fit, which was essentially the reason why he couldn't succeed as a VP of sales. And then when he came in as a CEO role, he had come in at least with a different set of perspectives, where he understood and started listening to that feedback loop to then generate and find where that product market fit was, and then pivoted the business. And now they've unlocked the opportunity to do like 20, 30 million in ARR. So um, I think like that idea of product market fit is super important. Do you feel like you were in any scenarios beforehand where that might have been like one of the issues of like, working within a company that just had poor product market fit, and then they just needed to point a finger somewhere? And how do you feel like that feeds into like now, within just people who are working in sales and like providing that support system to understand that?
You're talking my language. So, do I feel like I was at companies that did not have great product market fit, but wanted to scale or wanted to
Yeah.
achieve results that they weren't set up to achieve, and then assuming that the only missing ingredient was like the right sales hire?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've also been at companies that had product market fit, but had stalled out and were struggling to figure out where the next phase of growth was. So the first thing is, yes, I feel very strongly that most companies, many, not most, I've been in many companies that mistook kind of like average product market fit for great product market fit, in the sense
Yeah.
that if you're going to start pouring gas on the fire and really starting to scale, you know, maybe sometimes there's like brute force that is the thing that gets you to the next milestone. But in my experience, most of the time, you have so much positive feedback from your customer base that it's pretty clear that you've got something. And it doesn't, the truth is, listen, it's hard to be a CEO. And, I go through lots of days where I think that my job is really hard, but it shouldn't feel like the act of figuring out if you have happy people that like using your product, like that shouldn't feel so hard. It should
Yeah.
be pretty clear. And I feel like many companies have one part of product market, and I guess Mark Roberge would say there's go to market fit and product market fit. But
Mhm.
generally speaking, I think that there has been, I think it's evolving, a misunderstanding about how revenue is generated. There's
Mhm.
been a legacy perspective that the way money is made is that you hire a great sales leader who hires great account executives, and that's how they make money. And the reality is that is a combination of product and sales and marketing, because the way that you make money is that people love using your thing, and
Yeah.
they love using your thing so that they start telling their friends, and they serve
Yeah.
as references, and they are advocates on behalf of your growth. That's how money is really made with it,
Mhm.
which is starting with a great product and then adding execution on top of that.
And how do you feel like, Pavilion has helped support individuals that have gone through that similar experience? I mean, to me, I feel, working with a lot of early stage startups, again, seed to, Series B type kind of companies, a lot of what I feel like on the growth marketing side or sales side, it's like, it is it's primarily getting conversations with your target personas, but then also understanding and listening enough and asking the right questions to see if there is product market fit alignment. And if there isn't, to be able to categorize objections to a certain degree to funnel that information back to the executives that can make a decision around those things. But now you have data and stats to substantiate that direction. Um, and that's part of, I think, like also a big difference of what we're starting to see in terms of like the evolution of like the sales and marketing type roles, is to provide some of that feedback loop to those different departments, whether it's product or development or operations or what have you, that can actually make product decisions or executive leadership decisions around how to shift priorities based on that feedback. So do you see like that role now changing, becoming more like conversational to a certain degree, and but like creating milestones out of a conversation as opposed to just closing deals?
100%. At the center of all of this, and I wish it wasn't always the case, but the center of it is really the CEO, and whether
Hmm.
he or she or they are truly obsessed with their customers. And if they are, then you've created an opportunity for feedback to be transmitted through the organization. And if they are not, then it's going to be much more difficult. So from my perspective, it starts with the CEO or the founder. And then, yes, agree 100% that like the more sophisticated founder um, understands that like we should probably listen to the people that are talking to our customers or our prospects every day, that we shouldn't just discount their feedback. Now, there is an adage that, the salesperson always wants, they always want to lower the price. They always think the product is too expensive and, needs more features, right? Like we need to build that one thing. That's the reason that I didn't win that deal. And the prospect said it was too expensive and I could just sell more if it was cheaper and had more stuff in it. So you have to discount the feedback a little bit, but I do think that you have to create a feedback driven organization that is completely focused on customers and focused on getting feedback from customers in lots of different ways, so that there's not just one person that says this is what the customer thinks. And I also think that some of the new technology, like, these revenue intelligence platforms like Gong, right? That's a great way. I think the original idea was like it's call coaching for reps. Like the sales manager will listen to the rep and they will tell them, say this, don't say this. But now what you've also got is the true voice of the customer in a recording that
Hmm.
you can parse, transcribe, skip to different moments of, that you can circulate to the product organization, you can circulate it up to the executives, and you can make the whole thing much more holistic. So yes, I think that the salesperson, everybody at the company's job, if you're truly customer focused, is to find ways to interact with the customer and funnel feedback from the customer up through the ranks of the organization. And then the organization's job, which is, yes, the CEO and yes, the executive team, but really everybody's, is to synthesize that feedback and say, what if this is the mean, right? What if this is the new average of like this we should build? And what if this is an outlier? And that judgment is like so many things in life. It all comes down to judgment. There's no one axiom or one law
Yeah.
that lets you solve every problem from here on out, either in work or in life.
That said, I want to dive into the idea for Pavilion or Revenue Collective when you first started it. Um, you had spoken about being in this kind of like challenging time in your life, and then deciding to go out and build something of your own. Why Revenue Collective at the time?
It was just what I knew how to do.
Hmm.
So the direction for me was, I was bringing people together. I had just been fired in 2017. And I said, to the point, I need to start making money in different ways so that I'm not so dependent on other people and other companies. And so I had a consulting business and I started a consult. Well, I didn't have one. I started a consulting business. That was one idea. I had another idea, which was I wanted to monetize Revenue Collective. We had about 30 or 40 people. I said, let's start charging dues. So we charged our first dues on January 1st, 2018. And it was because it was a thing that I already had. It was a thing that I knew how to do. And I decided, like, let's give this a shot and let's see if people will pay for it, almost as an experiment.
Yeah.
And, not everybody paid. Most people paid. I think there's like 20 people or 21 people, and 19 of them paid, and the two people that didn't pay came back to pay later. But that was where it came from. This thing of like, what was I doing anyway? Well, what I was doing anyway was managing this community, was trying to bring value to people, trying to help them find jobs, trying to get their questions answered, and from there, the rest became history.
You said that it's exceeded kind of your expectations at this point. You want to, what do you imagine it to, what kind of role do you imagine this to start taking on? With this raise, like what are some of those milestones you guys are looking to accomplish in the next few years?
It exceeded my expectations relative to my initial set of expectations. Now it is not exceeding my expectations because I have raised them.
Yeah.
But what's my great aspiration? My great aspiration is that we figure out a way so that uh, first tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands of people that are members of ours and agree and believe in our values are all getting, first, they're getting value. They're getting
Yeah.
the services that they need in order to be great in their jobs. And as a consequence of that, we are also indoctrinating them in these core community concepts. So, the idea would be like, let's imagine a world where there's 100,000 people in Pavilion, and in any given place in the world, there's at least a couple hundred, if not a couple thousand. And all of those people not only are getting value, meaning taking courses and finding mentors, but they believe in the core underlying assumptions that created this opportunity in the first place. And those core underlying assumptions are around basically mutual support and reciprocity, right? The way that this is scaled, the reason that there's 7,800 people is because I don't talk to all of them. They talk to each other and they support each other and they help each other. So my great ambition is that we can create a parallel universe. Not, I won't use metaverse, maybe I just did, but a different world, a world that sits next to the current world. And you can think of the metaphors for the current world being LinkedIn and being just, a cutthroat dog eat dog kind of mentality.
Sure.
And there's a different world. And that world, and by the way, I'm not so naive to assume that like this world is possible in any government, any kind of cultural institution, like, regulated capitalism with a rule of law, like the United States and Western democracies. Like those are the things that make this possible, in my opinion. But there's a different world, and it's a world it's not as big, but it's a world of people that have all self-identified, hey, we believe in doing business a different way. We believe in helping each other. We believe in supporting each other. We frankly believe we understand why we pay for this service. We're getting value from the service, and we're willing to invest back into the service. And that group of people almost, the example I use is like, if you're the only altruistic person in a room full of takers, that's not a successful strategy, right? It's just, you're going to lose. You won't lose because you can't be the only person doing good if everybody else is doing bad. So how do you know who else wants to do good? How do you know who else is willing to self-identify as being willing to abide by a set of values? Well, one of the mechanisms could be affiliation with Pavilion. And so you can imagine a world where, because there's all these members, everybody's like, okay, I know that when I meet a fellow member of Pavilion and they sit across the table from me, that they are more likely, it doesn't mean they're all going to be saints, but they are more likely to be helpful, less likely to be jerks, less likely to screw me over. In the same way that when I meet like a fellow UVA alumni member, I think the same thing. I don't think every person that went to UVA is a great person, but I know that on the margin, I'm going to feel more a sense of responsibility to help them than if they went to, a different university. And that's because the university has sort of imparted that brand upon me. That's what we're trying to do with Pavilion.
And in those numbers that you're talking about, those are very that's a powerful community, right? That you can do a lot of different things with ultimately at a certain point in time. Like, has there been any like discussions around generating some kind of like productization or gathering like research or insights within the community and be able to like create products from those or services from those types of things?
We're always trying to think about, what are the stuff that we can build, but I'm pretty hesitant to try and like directly monetize, like to take data and insights and then translate those in some way. Like what I'd really rather do is build a compelling product experience for people that captures insights and serves it back to them, right? Like instead of selling their data to somebody else, I'd rather sell their data back to themselves, which is a pretty core use case for community anyway. And just make it part of membership, not necessarily make it an additional sale. Of course, the other thing everybody always recommends is you should start a headhunting firm. You should start a fund. I don't know that we're going to do either of those things. I do know that that we're excited about the products that we do want to build, and they're going to be related to rewarding people for doing good in the world through gamification and incentives.
On that note, I know we're rounding out on the time, so I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us and giving a glimpse into what Pavilion's got in store in the next few years. So, yeah, I know you're super busy, and I'm sorry we got off to a little bit of a late start due to some like technical issues, but thank you for being patient with us, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, of course. And if anybody's out there listening and wants to reach out to me, you can, sam@joinpavilion.com. We've got corporate memberships for companies that want to provide leadership and training resources to their entire go-to-market teams, not just for executives. And we've also got premium communities that we're launching for CEOs. So if you're an early stage founder out there and you want a peer group that can help take your company to the next level, let me know. Thanks, Chris, for having me.
Awesome. And we'll provide the links too in the different distribution platforms as well.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye bye.